I'm going down today.
All right. Thanks very much for being here. And thank you for doing this during the pandemic. We've been trying to connect virtually, learning a little bit about each other from a distance. So thank you, Sheila, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. I'm happy to be invited.
Good, good. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself. I think originally you're not from Virginia, you're from up north, right?
Yes. Okay. Originally, I'm from Camden, New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia. I've been here almost 50 years. When I speak about myself, I'm going to also speak about my husband. It'll be 5 years that he is gone, but he was grew up in northern New Jersey, an area called Westfield, and it was close to New York. So our saying was, if it was not for Richmond, we would have never have met.
Wow, wow. So how did you meet?
Bruce came to the University of Richmond about 52 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I came about 50 years ago. We're 2 years apart, to Virginia Commonwealth University. We both came for college.
Now, it was originally called RPI, right? Or is that?
Originally it was. When I applied to RPI, but by the time I was accepted, was starting to become Virginia Commonwealth University.
And RPI, I think, was like Richmond
Professional
Institute. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Virginia Commonwealth was both the Medical College of Virginia and RPI. They combined, and they kind of became the umbrella of a university, Virginia Commonwealth University.
So Bruce Zoll, for those who don't know, was an accountant, right? And he was
right.
A very
CPA, yes.
Yeah, CPA and a distinguished millionaire.
Yeah, I'll mention a few things, but
okay, yeah, if you can, please. Yes.
Yes. Back to when we met in 1972 in September. I was a sophomore, and the Israeli athletes were murdered in Munich at the Winter Olympics, at the Munich Olympics. At the time, of course, the world was shocked and the community was shocked. So the Richmond community heard the news, and they had a community service organized at Temple Bethel on Grove Avenue. Myself, being a student, I didn't have a car on campus and didn't drive in Richmond. Many students also didn't have that a luxury. So we all wanted to attend this community event and needed a ride. So there was a Jewish student house on West Franklin Street. The house is still there. It's 2 or 3 houses away from Beth Ahaba. And Bruce at the time, down on the bottom first floor, I would say, was like community rooms for Jewish students to come and have meetings and interact. And upstairs, there were 2 and an attic floors of rooms. So students rented them out. So it was a Jewish student dorm, basically. Bruce had a room at the time. He was renting there. He had left the University of Richmond campus and came over to West Franklin Street to live. So he volunteered, being the good guy he always was. He volunteered to drive students. So the first time I met him, I was a passenger in his car. He totally didn't know who I was at that time, but then several months later, I went and attended some programs at that Jewish student house and a Friday night dinner, actually. And that's when I met him.
People live there?
Yes.
And how many
Yes.
people, was it 5 people, 10 people?
Probably like, I mean, his room was 3 or 4, and then there was another like triple, and then there were some single rooms, and then there were some double rooms.
Oh, it was big.
It was a lot of students. Yeah.
Who paid for that? Or it just became like privately, these students kind of
The
got.
students paid for it,
Mhm.
but it was at the time there were a few Bethel members, and I don't remember their names, but who kind of footed the house.
Mhm.
They
Okay.
were behind it. Yeah. And there was also like an individual that ran programs.
Mhm.
It wasn't like
It sounds like it was
anything.
independent. Sounds like it was independent. Whoever ran programs did so because they wanted to,
Yes.
because they were part of some organization.
Yes. And then a lot of rabbis came down and gave talks and discussions. And I first met, I'm trying to think who was the rabbi of KBI at the time, but I know it was before Rabbi Lipschitz.
Before, was it Rabbi Davis or before?
Yes, it must have been Rabbi Davis. Yes. And he
Okay.
came down and gave some talks and things, and then other rabbis too. So, there were programs, etc.
Very nice.
So that is basically how Bruce and I met, and then we started dating.
Mhm. And
We were married in
you lived
19
here ever since? That's you.
what?
You've been in Virginia ever since, and you lived
Ever
here?
since.
Okay.
Yeah, ever since.
Wow.
1974, we got married. I was still a student. At that point, my program moved from VCU to MCV. I was finishing up my degree in occupational therapy. And then he went on to graduate school at VCU for accounting after he graduated from University of Richmond.
Now, what drew you to occupational therapy?
Oh, what drew me? When I was 16, I was a candy striper in Philadelphia at Thomas Jefferson University. I was too young to be basically the normal candy striper, to go on the floor and visit the patients. I had to, maybe I was 15.
I don't know what that
maybe
is.
I was 15.
What is a candy striper?
A candy striper is like a nurse's aide in training.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And they would wear these pink and white uniforms, be candy stripers.
Okay.
But they said I couldn't go out around visiting patients yet. So I said, well, what else can I do? I wanted to volunteer. And they said, you can volunteer in the occupational therapy department. You can volunteer in physical therapy and occupational therapy. So that summer, I volunteered in occupational therapy, and I absolutely fell in love with it.
I think it'd be helpful, if you can talk about Camden for just a little bit, because to Camden today has become a little bit of a rough neighborhood, and it wasn't always that way.
No.
Westfield, New Jersey. I spent the summer working in Westfield, New Jersey, so I'm more familiar with that. But Camden, I think I've probably passed through. But what Camden used to be like?
What Camden used to be like? Well, Camden had a very small downtown. When you said you were going downtown, you took a bus into Philadelphia.
Okay.
So that was like where the big things were going on, was Philly. Mm-hmm. East Camden was like more of a small town like Richmond. And there were row homes, kind of like Norfolk now with Ghent. If people know about Ghent, it's similar to that community.
Okay.
And people walked in the neighborhood. There were stores, a few blocks away. There was a kosher delicatessen. There was a kosher butcher. Mm-hmm. East Camden was very Jewish.
Mm-hmm. And it says
very Jewish neighborhood.
And the community slowly migrated. At least that's what seems to be the
exactly. They migrated when I was in high school. Migration started toward Cherry Hill.
Now I have to ask you, when did you choose the near West End to raise a family, and why did you pick this near West End area to raise your family?
Okay, well, that's our next
Place.
discussion.
Okay.
After we got married, we were living in the Fan
Mm-hmm.
near VCU. We had
Right.
an apartment. We wanted to buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
We bought our first house on Bromley Lane, which was a few blocks from Colemus. But how did we get to Colemus?
Yeah, some people who are going to be watching this don't even know Colemus.
Colemus, I know. Well, I'll mention that too.
Colemus is Young Israel of Richmond, for those who don't know. And, you know,
And it's where Share Torah is now.
Right, okay.
The Share Torah building. Well, my husband and I, the backgrounds, my husband grew up conservative, not Orthodox. I grew up in an Orthodox synagogue. So even though my parents weren't Shomer Shabbos, I became Shomer Shabbos, and we kept kosher and everything. So I told him when we got married that I needed to buy kosher meat. I needed to buy kosher. So we set up 2 sets of dishes. And he was more agreeable to not mix milk and meat and have kosher meat. Well, at the time, there were 2 kosher butchers in Richmond in the 70s. There was Harold Weiner and David Graben. Mr. Weiner, I'm not sure I remember where his butcher shop was, but some people might remember.
Now, is that W. Weiner's?
Yes, W. Weiner's husband.
Okay.
He was a member of KBI. Yes, they were members of KBI. Mr. David Graben was on West Carey Street. His shop is still there. The building actually is still there. It's something else now.
And he was Cole MS? Was he with Cole MS?
He was with Cole MS. Yes. So the Grabens reached out to us. Not only did he give us the best cuts of meat, him and his wife basically welcomed us into their home.
Wow.
And introduced us to a synagogue.
Very good. Very nice. That's very, very
And that
nice.
was Congregation Col Emes, which later became Young Israel of Richmond. And of course, now is the Share Torah Girls School.
Do you think that your involvement with Col MS eventually led you to the day school also?
Oh, absolutely. But my husband went to work in 1980 when he got his CPA. He went to work for George Rodgkin, Harriet Rodgkin's husband, George, which is Judy Lesson's stepfather.
And that's helpful for the audience to get connected to this history for sure.
Yeah. So in 1980, Sora, he actually started the job a day before Sora was born and then had to take off for her birth. But George at that time was very, very highly involved with the day school. And he asked Bruce to assist. So Bruce was the treasurer of the day school and became on the board of the day school before Sora was even in school.
So you guys were involved with the day school. Did the 2 of you also get involved with NCSY at all?
Later on, yeah. So I'll mention a few other things. Obviously, Bruce and I worked for Col MS and the Richmond community. He held, I think, every board position on Col MS there was. He was secretary, he was treasurer, he was vice president, he was president. He was also the KBI for umpteen years at Col MS. And then there was a joint minion between Col MS and KBI.
Yeah, that I think that right before I got here. But
right. And he was the KBI, of course, for the joint minion. Whenever, they needed, if they were at Col MS, he was the KBI. And if the KBI couldn't work, he worked.
Right.
So he was obviously a regular minyan goer, and he also helped keep the joint minyan going
Mhm.
for both Coemus KBI.
Yeah, and when it was totally in KBI, when I got here in 2011, he was also one of the Gabayim.
Right.
Now,
Right. He was also the treasurer of the Vodacastris of
yes,
Richmond
yes.
for I don't know how many years.
Yeah, he kept it going for sure. At least when I got here, he was
He
definitely
was still right.
a treasurer.
Mhm.
Definitely
Right.
a
Until
treasurer.
he got sick and could no longer do it.
Right. Are there any rabbis from this history that stick out in your mind as having a significant impact on you that you can think of?
Rabbi Aaron Winter.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe just if you can, just a few words about him for people who don't know him.
Well, he's the one that came to Richmond actually and did Bruce's funeral.
Okay.
Him and his wife, Rabbi Winter and Hannah Winter, were here in Richmond at Coemus for a number of years, and they helped bring us along in our Yiddishkeit and Bruce's learning. He was also a mentor for my husband, and even to the point that I was going to mention that when Bruce lost his father, just let me see here.
Yeah, he came from St. Louis, I think, for the.
St. Louis. He was in St. Louis.
Okay, yeah.
From Richmond to St. Louis, and you ask why they moved. They moved because there were no high schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They had sent their boys away, mm-hmm. but they did not want to send their girls away. Rabbi Winter had to take another position in St. Louis, mm-hmm. be able to give their girls a high school Jewish education.
Yeah, and I think that's why the Davises moved away also.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a very fascinating history.
Yes. Also, okay, in 2000, Bruce lost his father, and he wanted to be able to say Kaddish with a regular minyan, even on Shabbos. And at that time, Kol Emes was not getting a full minyan for him to say Kaddish. Mm-hmm. So Rabbi Winter at the time encouraged Bruce, even though it was Rabbi Winter's shul, right, situation, he said, you need to go and daven with a minyan. Mm-hmm. You need to go and join KBI.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
With Rabbi Winter's push, Bruce did it.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was a very big influence in our lives.
So you've spent a number of decades here now. So what would you say about living Jewish in Richmond or raising a Jewish?
All right, I got some information there. First, I wanted to mention that a few other things that Bruce was involved in. He was on the Federation Allocation Committee. He was also very active in Soviet Jewry from his college days. Mm-hmm. And we both helped with all the Russian resettlement programs.
Was there anything Israel related that sticks out in your memory at all that either of you were involved in terms of Israel, or did your children go to Israel or travel there at all?
Sarah went to Israel with Dr. and Mrs. Ben Ezra when she was a teenager. She helped be a mother's, she was like a mother's helper for them when they went to learn one summer. But she also did get to do some traveling. She spent a Shabbos with Rabbi Lipschitz and his family at the time because they knew each other from the day school. So yes, and then Hillel, when he was at Chofetz Chaim in Yeshiva, he also spent some semesters in Israel.
Do you think that that was kind of like a good complement for their development to kind of have that Israel experience and this
Absolutely.
very different Southern Jewish experience and that kind of?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I'll mention a couple of other things here. I also was president of the Koema Sisterhood for many years, more years than I can count.
Mhm.
Also volunteered as a friendly visitor with Jewish Family Services.
Mhm.
And in the year 1992, I was the Jewish Family Services Volunteer of the Year.
Very cool.
So I work with elderly in my occupational therapy.
So you got to know JFS pretty well.
Yes, yes. And I worked around the city, the West End, not only at Beth Shalom, but other nursing homes that had Jewish elderly that did not have a connection with anybody. So I would visit them weekly for an hour to 2 hours after I worked full time and before I picked up my kids to go home. I would go and be a friendly visitor. I helped them write letters. We did activities. We sat and talked.
How do you see, how do you describe how things have changed over the years with regards to these kinds of interactions or volunteer projects, professional projects?
Well, with the pandemic, it's very
Right.
difficult.
Right.
Everything,
Yeah.
you can't do what you used to be able to do.
Yeah, that's.
But I know their telephone reassurance program is probably over the top right now because of all the seniors that need,
Mhm.
you know, visits, so to speak, on the phone. And it was a big program even back then in the 90s.
Right.
But the friendly visitors, the people that really went out and spent time with people, was a really important program. And I still think it is, hopefully after this pandemic.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add
Yes.
to sign off?
If it's okay. Okay. I myself mentioned I am an OT. In 1976, I helped open one of the first 100 adult day centers in the United States.
Wow.
It was called Stewart Circle Center at the time, and now it's called Circle Center Adult Day Service. It's a nonprofit United Way agency, alternative to nursing home. I was there for 43 years until COVID happened. Last March, the center had issues and I am now not working. I am taking care of my youngest grandson. And while my daughter Sarah and my son-in-law Bruce, son-in-law Elliot work. Our family consisted of 2 children, Sarah and Sheila. Bruce didn't have a day school education and I didn't either. So like we said, it was extremely important when we came here. Richmond being a smaller community than what we knew of in New York and New Jersey, it was difficult being Jewish in a town with a church on every corner, if you knew. In 1996, the Richmond Times dispatch staff called us. And they told us that they were doing features on family life. And they wanted a Jewish family, an Orthodox family, but not a rabbi. So our family talked about it and we stepped up to the plate. We were hesitant at first, but the writer promised that we could see the article before it went to print and to make sure it showed us and the Richmond Jewish community in a positive light.
Wow.
It was titled Walking a Narrow Path. Orthodox Family Holds to Strictest Traditions and Customs.
You have a copy, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The writer interviewed us. She attended synagogue with us. She followed Hillel to RTA and Sora to Share Torah, which was in the basement of KBI at that time.
Mhm.
A quote from the article about Jewish education, she quoted from me, "We want to prepare them for the future," Sheila said. "The education is a way to empower them. If they have a foundation and an education at a young age, they'll not only understand what it means to be Jewish, but also be able to teach and articulate it."
Well, that's very powerful. And your children and grandchildren are very knowledgeable.
They are living that. That's
Right.
what I say. My children and my son-in-law, who also grew up here in Richmond, have excelled in this area because of their day school educations and their yeshiva education.
Mhm.
And now I have 5 grandchildren, 4 in school or in yeshiva, that are following in their parents' footsteps. Okay. And the only other thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned NCSY. Sora and Elliot were the ones,
Mhm.
Richmond's NCSY chapter.
It's incredible how it started, where it is now, and we're lucky.
It was in KBI. Elliot helped be a leader, and Sora was a participant at the time.
Yes.
And it was housed in KBI. And now my granddaughter Nava participates, and my grandson Svi has participated in certain programming. And that was a very big component of their lives.
And it's amazing, now your son-in-law is here 5 or 6 days a week.
Yes.
And we're very fortunate to have him. But
yes.
It's an incredible history.
Yes.
And,
I want to just mention the other thing that I love, and I know everybody on the Member Mondays have mentioned, is the Jewish Food Festival.
Right.
I had volunteered for many years, and I love baking cookies and worked on stuffed cabbage and being a server. The Plotnick family obviously have gotten into every job,
including the babysitting
festival, including babysitting. And that's, one thing that we look forward to every year. I know this year it hasn't been able to happen, but we're looking forward to next year.
Yes. Well, I have to thank you very much, because you've really, you've painted.
This is the article.
That's perfect. Walking a narrow path. That's great.
There's pictures of Sara and I cooking that actually they said Shabbos, but this was actually Pesach. This putting up the sukkahs, and Hillel davening at RTA.
Okay.
And this was Bruce and I putting up the sukkah. So see, it was a really full page.
Yeah.
Interviewed other professionals and Mr. Deere at the time, part of Coemis.
You've woven us a picture through these history and the stories, and it allows us to really see all the connections and how it all comes together. So,
and the other thing that we were very much involved in was the Erev.
Right. Yes. We'll have
development of the Erev.
Yes. Maybe one of these days.
No Erev. When my daughter was born, 2 blocks from Coemis, and there was no Erev to push her carriage.
Yes. Well, this community has come a long way. We're very thankful for you and a lot of the volunteers that help make this place a reality, in this community that we call home. So thank you very much for your time, and appreciate you doing this.
Okay, thank you.